Welcome to the Cervical Cancer Survivor Series. I'm Martha Kempner with the American Sexual Health Association and the National Cervical Cancer Coalition. We recently reached out to survivors across the country to hear their stories of diagnosis, treatment, and survivorship, and get their advice for others whose lives are impacted by this preventable disease. We also talked to providers in the field to answer questions about screening, prevention, and treatment. In this episode, we speak to Jen English. Jen had a lot of experience in sexual health and was comfortable talking about the topic, but she realized how much she didn't know about HPV and cervical health when she was diagnosed with early stage cervical cancer. Her experience inspired her to become an NCCC chapter leader. Thank you so much for being with us and for sharing your story about cervical cancer. Can you take a second to introduce yourself and tell us why you're here?
So my name is Jen English. I live in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. I have lived here pretty much my entire life. Live about 5 houses down from the house I grew up in where my parents still live, so haven't gotten very far. I have 6 kids. I'm a business owner. I have a full-time job, and I am a new chapter leader for, I guess, Cedar Rapids, Iowa, but mainly like Central Iowa because there's no other chapter leaders around. And I guess probably the newest for the National Cervical Cancer Coalition.
Yes, I think we saw your application and invited you to be a guest on the podcast series instantly. So thank you so much for agreeing and welcome to the National Cervical Cancer Coalition. Um, can you tell us your cancer story? How did you get diagnosed and what happened from there?
So it feels weird to say that I'm a cervical cancer survivor because I don't have the typical cancer story. Luckily, I was diagnosed about a year and a half ago, I guess, with cervical cancer, stage 1A1. And I didn't even know that was a thing. I'd never heard of that. Apparently, it's the lowest form of cancer you can have to still be considered cancer. And mine was treatable with a hysterectomy. So I was able to kind of fly through that process. I found out in July, had my appointments, and then I was able to have my hysterectomy on September 1st of last year.
So, how did you find out that you had cervical cancer?
So I've spent my entire adult life with HPV. I have known I had it. I've known since I was in college, thanks to Planned Parenthood, who alerted me to it in the first place. And so I've always known that I've had abnormal PAPs. I always go and get them. Sexual health has been a big part of my life for the last 15 years. And so I knew that that was what I needed to do. I always went and got those appointments, and I always just expected my pap smear to be abnormal. So I got a phone call. They left a message. They said, "Hey, Jen, you have an abnormal pap. Give us a call back." I did not give them a call back because I have heard that before a lot of times. So I went on with my life. I started feeling really, really tired, exhausted, just like run down. I explain it to people as like the last 4 weeks of pregnancy exhausted, just like heavy and tired. And I didn't understand why. And, I'm in my late 30s. So I was like, there could be thyroid problems, hormone problems. Who knows what this could be? Let's go find out. So I went to my doctor, who actually was a nurse practitioner, and she was our new family doctor for my kids. And I hadn't seen a doctor besides for pregnancies and for that pap smear the year before when I never called back. And so she was like, "Hey, first of all, nice to meet you. Did you ever follow up on that abnormal pap smear?" And I said, "No, I did not, because I didn't know I needed to. Things have always been abnormal for me. I had no idea this was extra abnormal." So she got me into the local gynecologist, and we did the biopsy, the LEAP procedure, all those things. At that point, they were saying it was precancerous. Of course, they don't tell you that up front. And I remember even saying to them when they did it, I was like, "Is it cancer?" And they were like, "No, it's precancer." And then, the next day they called me and said, "No, actually, it's cancer. We just need to have you come in and figure out the next steps." And lucky for me, it was a super easy fix.
So, how did you figure out the next steps? Did you go to an oncologist? Did they help you find an oncologist? We're trying to help people understand essentially what to do next.
Yeah, and it was really confusing, honestly. They did lay out all the steps, and even then it was confusing. They were like, "We're going to get you in right away. You're going to go and have," like, I was like, "Oh, so I'm having a hysterectomy tomorrow? I don't know what's happening. I'm just going to this appointment." They got me set up with an oncologist. I went in, and it was wild to me, honestly. I felt like I was in the Twilight Zone because she looked at me and she said, "What brings you here today?" And I'm like, "You're an oncologist. What do people come here for?"
Maybe not the best question.
Yeah, and then I said, "Well, I had an abnormal pap. I had a biopsy. They said that it was cancer." And she looked at me and she goes, "Cancer? You're too young. You can't have cancer." Starts flipping through the papers. And she's like, "Oh, there it is." And I was like,
This was actually the oncologist.
yes, yes. So that was so stressful, which is probably not what you're trying to portray here in this podcast, but
But we want the real stories.
yeah, that's the real story. I was very like I felt gaslit a little bit. Like they told me I had cancer, and then now she's like, "No, you can't have cancer. That's not possible. Why are you here?" I thought that's why people came here. So after that, she figured out I had cancer. She figured out we were going to have a hysterectomy. We scheduled the hysterectomy. It was honestly the best thing I've ever done. Not having a uterus. Great. 5 stars. Love that.
I think there are a lot of women who can sympathize or who can agree with that statement.
Yes.
So, did you need any kind of follow-up care after the hysterectomy? And how was the recovery from that?
Yeah, so the recovery was okay. So listen, I have 6 kids. I own a business. I work a full-time job. I don't know what rest means, and I know that about myself. I'm very self-aware. However, they told me you're going to have to rest for 6 weeks, and I was like, but will I really? I don't know. We'll see. And yes, the answer is yes. You do need to rest for 6 weeks. It is very difficult to move from after abdominal surgery. I have 5 incisions across my abdomen on all sides. They're only about a half inch long. So 5 little stab puncture wounds across it. So that was really great that it wasn't, super invasive as far as tearing up my whole abdomen.
And this was a year and a half ago.
Yep.
Have you needed any follow-up?
So so it would have been a year ago, September 1st was a year. And I have 2 years of follow-up appointments every 3 months. Now, after that oncologist did my hysterectomy, I had one follow-up with her very shortly after, like a week after my surgery. She said, "Yep, healing up great, awesome, see you soon." And then I got a call that she was not there anymore. And so now my town actually in Iowa, maybe, I mean, probably even within 100 miles or more, there's only one that can do my follow-ups.
Really?
Yeah, as far as I'm being told, I'm being sent to the University of Iowa, which is about 30 minutes away for my follow-up care. I go to an oncology department there for women, and that's where I do follow-up every 3 months for 2 years, is what they're telling me.
Okay. And what do the follow-ups consist of?
Basically a pap smear. It's really just a real basic one, making sure that there's no cancer coming back on the vaginal walls, I guess.
Mhm.
Because I asked him, I'm like, "You took it all out. What are you going to find?"
Right.
They
And
said,
they also removed your cervix. So we're used to getting pap smears of the cervix. So
yes.
that would seem almost counterintuitive, but it does make sense to make sure that it's not in any of the surrounding tissues.
Yep.
So what made you want to be an advocate for this? I mean, this was all things considered positive experience. What made you want to take this on as an advocacy effort?
For my past job, I worked doing sales for adult product. And so women's health, women's sexual health was a big deal. That was something I was very passionate about for a very long time. I did that job for almost 12 years. I've always been very passionate about that. And I think a lot of it just was kind of the environment I was in. I was around other women who were passionate about it. And so I kind of lived in this little bubble of like, this is important stuff. And then now I'm out in the real world and I'm not surrounded by that bubble anymore. And I'm like, wow, nobody knows this stuff. I know quite a few people where I live because of how long I've been a business owner and been doing marketing and networking. I put out on my Facebook the other day, like looking for cervical cancer survivors to like 6,000 people that follow me. I'm the only one, at least the only one willing to talk about it.
So that's a important question. Did you find an unwillingness to talk about it? Did you experience any stigma when you told people about your own cancer? I'm wondering because you're obviously very comfortable talking about these issues, but not everyone
I
is.
think that people know me, so they know that I'm comfortable. They know what I used to do. People follow me because they never know what I'm going to say. So they already know who I am. And so they're not surprised when things happen or when I say things. But I think there was definitely like a change of subject. You could kind of tell that it got
Hmm.
a little awkward because we don't talk about HPV because it sounds too much like an STI, which it is. But we don't understand how common it is and how many people actually have it and how many people don't even realize they have it because sometimes symptoms don't show up. I just happened to have symptoms when I was in college and I knew, and then I got all these abnormal pap smears and then I knew, right? So it gets awkward.
Did you know about HPV before you had abnormal pap smears?
No, I was born in 1986. I grew up in the 90s. I graduated in the early 2000s. It was too far before people started talking about HPV. I heard about it when I got it in college.
I just want to ask, how did you get into selling adult products? And what do you think you learned from that? Apart from this experience, what do you think you learned from that about the way we deal with sex?
Such an invaluable life experience because we don't talk about sex enough. We do it and we don't talk about it. And there's implications, right? There's consequences to the sex that we have, and we don't care and we don't talk about it. And I did talk about it a lot, and I talked about it very openly and very freely. It probably made people uncomfortable, but they didn't say it because they knew that it wouldn't matter to me because I was going to talk about it anyway. And I loved it so much because I got to talk about it in a way that was trust building and hilarious. I always called it like a stand-up comedy show with like, it's the products you could buy at the end. It was fun and entertaining and educational. And the education piece was things that people did not get anywhere else. Like I'll never forget. I promise you I will never forget walking into a college party here in Cedar Rapids at the community college. There's 20 girls, all 18, 19 years old, and I'm setting up my stuff. And I have a whole presentation, right? Like there's a process. I start at the beginning, I go through, I do a thing. This one did not go that way because the girl looked at me and she said, "Why does it hurt when I have sex?" And I was like, "No." And then I said, "Okay, now this is the point of the conversation where we talk about lube." And we talked about lube for an extended period of time. I came back and circled back to some of the other stuff. I sold 20 bottles of lube, and that was the only thing I sold at that entire party. And I felt, even though I didn't make a whole lot of money off of it, I felt like it was a job well done because holy cow, girls needed to know that information.
Did anyone talk to you about the sexual side effects of the hysterectomy or
Yes, and I also kind of already knew because I had talked with women in menopause, in premenopause, post hysterectomies. I had talked to those customers before about things to help. So I know
Mhm.
dryness is a really big issue after hysterectomies. It's awkward to talk about. It comes up at every single one of my follow-up appointments. Do you have any abnormal bleeding? Da da da, any of these things? And I'm like, well, just because I didn't use enough lube this time.
kind of branching off of that? You've talked about how open you are around talking about sexuality, and you have 6 kids. What do you talk to them about? And have any of them reached the age of getting the HPV vaccine yet?
I used to joke all the time at my parties that I have 6 kids and so I know the products work. That was always hilarious because here we are. But yes, I have 2 teenage boys and a 13-year-old girl, and I'm pretty sure all 3 of them just got their HPV shots. Yeah, they complained, and I was like, well, sorry. And I remember saying to them too, I said, well, I'm really sorry that that hurt. I understand that it hurts, but it hurts way less than having cancer later. And that's how I got cancer. This is going to prevent you from getting that cancer that I just had.
Was it something that your pediatrician talked to you about, or was it something that had to go in and advocate for?
They just offer it. They hand me a paper and they offer it. Luckily, I already had done my own research and knew I knew the details.
What would you say to other people who might be hesitant about getting their children the HPV vaccine?
I would say that I understand the hesitation. There's a lot of info out there. There's a lot of conflicting info. There's a lot of people who say vaccines are bad, that are they're broken, they're gonna hurt you even more. In my personal experience, I have not seen that. I would also rather prevent cancer than knowingly open them up to that, especially knowing what I know, because we don't talk about HPV enough. I did not learn about HPV in school. Maybe they're teaching about it now,
Mhm.
but I mean, the statistics, I don't know what they are exactly, but they're high. If you go to college and interact with anyone sexually, you're probably going to come out with HPV. unfortunately. And so why not block yourself from it? It just makes sense.
Yes, it's about 80% of sexually active people will get HPV. And the thing about HPV is that most of those cases will resolve on their own, and you may never even know you had it.
Mhm.
But when they don't resolve on their own, that's because they're a risk for either cancer or genital warts.
Mhm.
So now that you have joined NCCC as a chapter
Yeah.
leader, obviously it's only been a couple weeks, so you probably haven't done any events yet, but what are you planning on doing and what are you excited about?
I'm really excited about the education piece, and I'm a little nervous about it too because I'm very comfortable in my former world, my former job, and I have a new world now that is the complete opposite. Bringing those two together might be interesting, but I feel it is important as a cervical cancer survivor myself. God wouldn't have given me cervical cancer if he didn't think that I could do something with it, right? So it's my job to use my platform to speak for those who maybe are not willing to speak, don't know how to speak, have no idea what they're even talking about because no one has told them. So I'm just hoping to be able to use my platform to inform people. And with that being said, I have some events planned for January. I own an indoor playground and party venue. And so it's very kid focused. And we host events, and we host the same event 4 times a month, every Saturday or every Sunday. The January event will be every Sunday, and it's going to be called Happy Blue Year, which is a meet and greet with our friend Bluey, the little Disney character.
I love that show.
Everybody loves that show. It's great. There's so many great messages, and it's really nice that Bluey is actually really kind of more progressive with a lot of the things they talk about too. And so parents are opening themselves up to different ideas.
Yes.
So, anyways, that's a whole nother subject. But we're having Happy Blue Year. It's going to be a big meet and greet party with Bluey. And since the cervical cancer awareness ribbon is a shade of blue, a teal shade of blue, we're going to incorporate the cervical cancer fundraiser. I'm going to do a ribbon wish wall where they can donate to the organization. And then also make some. I actually was just at my follow-up appointment last week, and I asked, I'm in a very interesting position, right? And I'm like, hey, so is there a contact here I can talk to about like bringing in like hope bags, like they would do for breast cancer survivors, but let's do it for cervical cancer survivors instead. She's probably thinking this is a really awkward time to be asking this, but yeah. And then I was so impressed. I don't know what her title is, but the one that I see there for my follow-ups, she actually called me later and said, hey, I got some information for you. Can I send it over to you? And followed up with me. I get in a call from University of Iowa. I'm like, uh-oh, what'd they find, And then it's just her. She's like, hey, following up with you on that thing. I talked to some people and I got you some info. And so now I just have this partnership basically just with my own doctor where I can bring these bags into the University of Iowa. And I've done something similar actually in September. We did teddy bears for Childhood Cancer Awareness Month and sent teddy bears to the Children's Hospital there. So really just forming those relationships, finding education and getting the word out, and then, making a little bit of money in the process too.
Well, it sounds like fun.
Yeah.
Thank you. This was really fun. I might want to be one of those 6,000 people who follow you on Facebook because sounds like you do say fun and interesting things.
I try. Come on over. Love to be friends.
Thank you so much for listening. If you want to listen to all episodes in our Cervical Cancer Survivor Series, head to nccc-online.org, where you can also find a lot of information about cervical cancer prevention and screening.